Welcome back to Expensive Coins History Channel, the place where ordinary pocket change transforms into extraordinary history, and where the coins you may have dismissed for decades could be sitting on a fortune you never imagined possible. Before we dive into today's episode, I want you to do something right now. Go to your coin jar, your old wallet, your grandmother's dresser drawer, or that dusty shoebox under the bed. Because today, we are talking about 5 Abraham Lincoln 1-cent coins. 5 pennies that look like they belong in your change purse. But together, they represent over $500,000 in collector value. That's right, 5 pennies, more than $500,000. And one of them, the one we're saving for last, has sold for $140,000. A single penny. Stay with us because what you're about to learn will change the way you look at every coin you ever touch again. Today's journey begins with a coin from 1977, a year that meant something to a lot of people. The year Elvis Presley died. The year Star Wars changed cinema forever. The year the New York City blackout gripped the nation in darkness. And quietly, unassumingly, the United States Mint struck billions of Lincoln cents that year, most of which have been lost to vending machines, coat pockets, and the cracks between sofa cushions. But one particular version of the 1977 Lincoln cent, under the right conditions with just the right story behind it, has commanded a price that would stun even the most seasoned numismatist in the world. Let's go back, all the way back, to understand why a penny, the most humble denomination in American currency, carries such weight in the collector world. The Lincoln cent has one of the longest, most storied runs in United States coinage history. It was first introduced in 1909, commissioned by President Theodore Roosevelt as part of a broader artistic renaissance in American coin design. The sculptor Victor David Brenner, a Lithuanian immigrant who had made a name for himself carving portraits of the elite, was tapped for the job. His design placed Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the obverse, making Lincoln the first historical figure ever to appear on a circulating United States coin. That was revolutionary. Before Lincoln, American coinage had been dominated by allegorical figures, Lady Liberty, symbolic eagles, never a real person. The Lincoln cent broke every tradition, and it did so with grace. Brenner's portrait of Lincoln is a masterpiece of restraint. The 16th president faces right, his jaw set with quiet determination, his expression neither triumphant nor defeated, simply resolute. The word liberty stands behind him to the left, the date to the right, and I in God we trust arcs above his head like a halo of national faith. It is a portrait that asks nothing of the viewer except attention, and in return it gives everything. The quiet dignity of a man who held a nation together through its bloodiest chapter. Now, by the time we reach 1977, the Lincoln cent has been through multiple reverse redesigns. The original wheat stalk reverse, often called the wheat penny, gave way in 1959, Lincoln's 150th birthday, to a new reverse depicting the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. This was itself a profound artistic and symbolic choice. The Lincoln Memorial reverse, designed by Frank Gasparo, showed the gleaming marble temple in miniature, and if you look very carefully, and collectors do look very carefully, you can actually see a tiny Lincoln statue seated inside the memorial on the coin. A president within a monument within a coin. History folded into itself. By 1977, the Lincoln Memorial cent was nearly 2 decades old. It had become the standard, the expected, the taken for granted. The United States Mint produced over 5 billion Lincoln cents that year across multiple facilities. 5 billion. At that volume, most coins destined for circulation were struck quickly, with efficiency prioritized over perfection. But within that vast ocean of copper and zinc, errors happen. And in the world of numismatics, errors are not mistakes, they are treasures. The 1977 Lincoln cent that commands serious collector attention is not a common circulation strike. It belongs to a category of coins that collectors call proof coins or exceptionally preserved specimens. Coins that were either struck under special conditions, survived decades in pristine, uncirculated condition, or bear characteristics that separate them from the billions of ordinary cents sharing their birth year. Here is something that most people never stop to consider. The difference between a coin that has been handled, passed around, and used in commerce for 50 years and a coin that was struck, placed carefully in a holder or original mint packaging, and never touched by human hands in all that time. That difference is measured not in wear and tear alone, but in a kind of magic. The surface of a gem uncirculated coin from 1977 reflects light the way the coin did on the very day it was made. The luster, that rolling cartwheel shimmer that coin graders spend years training their eyes to evaluate, is completely intact. The fields, the flat background areas of the coin, are mirror clear. The high points of Lincoln's portrait, his cheekbone, his ear, the knot of his jacket lapel remain razor sharp. Grading services like the Professional Coin Grading Service and the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation exist precisely because the difference between a coin graded MS-65 and one graded MS-68 can be the difference between a coin worth $20 and a coin worth thousands. The numerical scale runs from 1 to 70, and the coins at the very top of that scale, the 60s, the 65s, the 67s, the rare and almost mythical 69s and 70s, are where the real fortunes live. The 1977 Lincoln cent that has captured the imagination of serious collectors is one of those coins that sits at the rarefied heights of that scale. And the story of how it got there is, in many ways, the story of American numismatics itself. A hobby that began as the pastime of the wealthy and educated, spread through the middle of the 20th century into something approaching a national obsession, and has now entered a new golden age powered by investment thinking, population reports, and the kind of data-driven precision that would have seemed impossibly scientific to collectors of previous generations. There is something deeply personal about collecting Lincoln cents. For many Americans aged 35 and older, the Lincoln cent is inseparable from childhood memory. It is the coin you pressed into the penny loafer your mother bought you. It is the coin you dropped into the fountain at the mall and made a wish on. It is the coin the tooth fairy left back when a single cent still carried the weight of possibility. There is a reason the Lincoln cent has never been eliminated from circulation despite decades of economic argument that its production cost exceeds its face value. It means something to people. It carries memory the way no other denomination can. And that emotional weight, that connection, is exactly why certain Lincoln cents from years like 1977 do something that purely analytical investors sometimes struggle to understand. They sell for amounts that seem disconnected from logic. Because the logic is not purely financial. It is cultural. It is historical. It is the handshake across time between the person who held that coin in 1977 and the collector who holds it today. Now, let us talk about something that collectors call the strike. The strike of a coin refers to the pressure and precision with which the dies, the hardened steel tools engraved with the coin's design, impress that design onto the planchet, the blank metal disc that becomes the coin. A full strike means every detail of the design is transferred completely, from the deepest recesses of the die to the highest points of the finished coin. A weak strike leaves mushy details, softness on Lincoln's hair, vagueness in the lettering. A full, sharp strike on a coin that has also been perfectly preserved creates something that collectors call a coin of exceptional technical quality. And those coins, regardless of the year, regardless of the denomination, will always find buyers. The 1977 Lincoln cent at the top of the collector hierarchy is a coin of exactly that description. Sharp, lustrous, preserved, and backed by a year whose cultural weight gives it an extra layer of meaning that purely modern coins simply cannot match. So what is this coin worth? What does the market say when a 1977 Lincoln cent graded at the absolute peak of preservation, attributed with the kind of documentation and pedigree that serious collectors demand, comes to auction? The answer is $61,000. $61,000 for a coin whose face value is 1 cent. A coin that, in the worst-case scenario, buys you nothing more than a fraction of a plastic bag in a grocery store. In the best-case scenario, if it is the right coin in the right grade with the right story, it is a $61,000 piece of American history that fits in the palm of your hand. If Chapter 1 left you reconsidering every coin in your collection, then what you are about to hear in this chapter will stop you completely in your tracks. Because we are moving from a coin worth $61,000 to one that has sold for more than double that amount. And the reason this coin commands such an extraordinary price is not simply about condition, not simply about rarity, and not simply about age. It is about a mistake so significant, so brazen, and so historically documented that it turned an ordinary Lincoln cent into one of the most talked about coins in the entire history of American numismatics. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the 1969 D Lincoln cent, and the story behind it is unlike anything else in this video. To understand the 1969 D, you first need to understand what the letter D means on a coin. That small letter, tucked just below the date on the obverse of a Lincoln cent, is a mint mark. tells you where the coin was made. The D stands for Denver. The Denver Mint, one of the United States Mint's most productive facilities, situated in Colorado, a mile above sea level, producing billions of coins every year for circulation across the American economy. The Philadelphia Mint, the oldest of all, carried no mint mark for much of its history. Its coins were simply unmarked, the assumed default. San Francisco used an S. Denver used a D. And that little letter matters enormously to collectors because different mint facilities produce different quantities of coins, used different dies, employed different quality controls, and sometimes, just sometimes, produced errors that the other facilities did not. The year 1969 sits at a fascinating crossroads in American history. The nation had just watched Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. Woodstock had just electrified a generation. The Vietnam War cast a long, dark shadow over the country's conscience. Richard Nixon was in the White House. The civil rights movement had transformed the legal and moral landscape of the nation, though the work was far from finished. And in the midst of all of this turbulence, the Denver Mint was doing what it always did, striking coins by the billions, feeding an economy that ran, in part, on the faith represented by a copper cent bearing the face of Abraham Lincoln. In 1969, the Denver Mint produced just under 3 billion Lincoln cents. 3 billion. A number so large it is almost meaningless to the human mind. And yet within that staggering production, there exists a coin so extraordinary that it has occupied the attention of collectors, government investigators, and auction houses for more than half a century. The 1969 D Lincoln cent that commands the kind of attention we are discussing today is a double die coin. Now, if you are new to numismatics, that phrase requires some explanation because it is one of the most important and most misunderstood concepts in coin collecting. A double die is not a coin that has been struck twice. It is not a mechanical double exposure in the photographic sense. A double die is a die, one of those hardened steel tools used to stamp coin designs onto planchets, that was itself improperly made. During the hubbing process, when the design is transferred from a master hub into a working die through intense mechanical pressure, if the die or the hub shifts even fractionally between impressions, the resulting die carries a slightly doubled image of the design. Every single coin struck from that die will carry that doubling. It is baked in. It is permanent. And depending on how dramatic the doubling is, it creates a coin that collectors will chase relentlessly. The 1969 D double die Lincoln cent is a coin that, when examined under magnification, reveals a world of detail that the naked eye might initially miss but, once seen, cannot be unseen. The date, 1969, shows clear, dramatic doubling. The lettering in Liberty shows it. The motto "I in God we trust" shows it. What you are seeing on that coin is the ghost of a misaligned die impression, frozen permanently into every coin that die ever touched. And once you know what you are looking at, it is extraordinary. Now here is where the story takes a truly remarkable turn, and where the 1969 D separates itself from virtually every other double die coin in the Lincoln cent series. When these coins first began appearing in the collector community in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the United States Secret Service, yes, the same agency responsible for protecting the President of the United States, became involved. The Secret Service, at the time, was responsible for investigating counterfeit currency, and when reports of these unusual 1969 D cents began circulating, agents initially suspected that the coins might be counterfeits. The doubling was so pronounced, so unusual, that it seemed, to untrained eyes, like it could not be a legitimate product of the United States Mint. Collectors who had the coins were reportedly visited by Secret Service agents. Some coins were confiscated. The numismatic community was buzzing with rumors, speculation, and a kind of low-grade panic that you only get when the federal government starts showing up at coin shows asking questions. It was eventually determined that the coins were genuine, authentic products of the Denver Mint, struck by a defective double die, and not counterfeits at all. But the episode left a permanent mark on the coin's legend. The 1969 D double die cent had been investigated by the United States Secret Service. That is not a distinction many coins can claim, and it added an irresistible layer of intrigue to an already remarkable piece. But the story does not end with the Secret Service. The 1969 D double die cent is also an extraordinarily rare coin in terms of surviving population. Because many of the coins were confiscated in the early days of discovery, and because many others were simply spent without recognition of their significance, the number of confirmed, authenticated examples known to the numismatic community is astonishingly small. We are not talking about thousands of survivors. We are not even talking about hundreds. The confirmed population of high-grade 1969 D double die Lincoln cents is measured in the tens. Some estimates put the total number of known examples across all grades at fewer than 50 coins. When you combine rarity at that level with documented historical significance, Secret Service involvement, and a dramatic, highly visible double die variety, you have the formula for a coin that attracts serious money. Consider the emotional dimension of owning such a piece. When you hold a 1969 D double die Lincoln cent, you are holding a coin that tells multiple stories simultaneously. It tells the story of the Denver Mint in one of the most turbulent years of the 20th century. It tells the story of a mechanical imperfection that escaped quality control and entered circulation before anyone truly understood what had happened. It tells the story of Secret Service agents knocking on collectors' doors, of community panic, of official investigation, and of ultimate vindication. And it tells the story of an American penny, the most democratic of all denominations, becoming, against every expectation, a 5-figure, 6-figure treasure. For collectors between the ages of 35 and 65, 1969 carries powerful personal resonance. If you were born that year, this coin is a birth year coin, and birth year coins hold a special category of emotional value in the collecting world. If you were a child in 1969, you may have held one of these cents without ever knowing what it was. That possibility, the idea that you might have once owned something worth $127,000 and spent it on a candy bar, is exactly the kind of thought that keeps collectors searching, examining, and hoping. The question of how to identify a genuine 1969 D double die is one that requires proper tools and reference materials. A loupe or a coin microscope is essential. The doubling on a genuine specimen is not subtle. It is not the kind of machine doubling that affects thousands of ordinary coins and means very little in terms of value. Machine doubling produces a flat, shelf-like shadow on the design elements. The true double die shows separate, distinct, fully formed secondary images, with visible separation between the two impressions. The date digits on a genuine 1969 D double die will each appear to have a shadow twin, displaced measurably from the primary image. The words of the motto will look almost as if two coins have been superimposed. It is unmistakable once you know what you are looking for. Authentication by a recognized third-party grading service is absolutely essential for any coin of this nature. The combination of rarity, value, and the coin's historical profile makes it a target for forgeries and misattributions. Only a coin that has been encapsulated and certified by a reputable grading service carries the kind of provenance that serious buyers in the auction market will accept. And in that auction market, the certified, authenticated 1969 D Lincoln double die cent has reached a value that commands universal respect among numismatists. $127,000. For a penny. For 1 cent of face value. A coin that, in the wrong hands, might have bought a pack of gum in 1969 and disappeared forever. In the right hands, in the hands of a collector who knew what they were holding, it became a piece of American history worth more than most people earn in 2 years of full-time work. 2 chapters in, and we have already traveled through the world of pristine preservation and the shadow of a Secret Service investigation. But Chapter 3 takes us somewhere entirely different. Because the story of the 1971 Lincoln cent is not primarily a story about errors, and it is not primarily a story about perfect condition. It is a story about transition, about a nation in the middle of reinventing itself, and about a coin that sits at the intersection of metallurgical history, economic policy, and the quiet, stubborn resilience of a design that refused to be forgotten. And at the end of this chapter, you will discover that this particular penny has commanded $118,000, and the reason why will surprise you in ways you did not see coming. Let us set the scene. The year is 1971. The United States is in the middle of one of the most economically turbulent periods of the 20th century. President Richard Nixon has just done something that shook the entire global financial system to its core. In August of 1971, Nixon announced the suspension of the dollar's convertibility to gold, a move that effectively ended the Bretton Woods system that had governed international monetary policy since the end of World War II. The world had operated on the assumption that the American dollar was as good as gold, literally. And then, in a single televised address, that assumption was dismantled. The The era of the gold standard was over. Money, from that point forward, would be what governments said it was, backed not by precious metal but by faith, by institutional trust, by the collective agreement of nations to honor a number printed on paper. Think about what that means in the context of a penny. In 1971, the Lincoln cent was made of a composition that had been standard since 1962, 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. Real metal, tangible weight, a coin you could feel in your hand and know instinctively that it was made of something. But with the gold standard gone, with money itself becoming increasingly abstract, there was growing pressure on the United States Mint to reconsider the metallic composition of its coinage. The cost of the metal in a coin was creeping toward and sometimes exceeding the face value of the coin itself. This was an economic absurdity that Congress and the Treasury were watching with increasing anxiety. The 1971 Lincoln cent was struck during this period of monetary soul-searching. It was still copper, still the warm, reddish-brown metal that had defined the Lincoln cent since 1909. But it was being struck in a world where the very concept of money was changing beneath everyone's feet. And that tension between the tangible and the abstract, between the historical and the modern, is woven into every 1971 Lincoln cent ever made. Now, the Philadelphia Mint in 1971 produced Lincoln cents without a mint mark, as had been the tradition for Philadelphia coins for most of the cent's history. The absence of a mint mark does not make a coin less significant. In many cases, it makes attribution more challenging and therefore more interesting to serious numismatists. The 1971 Lincoln cent from Philadelphia is the coin we are examining today, and the variety that commands extraordinary collector attention is one that requires you to understand a concept called the double die, but with a crucial distinction from what we discussed in Chapter 2. The 1971 Lincoln cent double die is a different animal from the 1969 D. Where the 1969 D doubling is dramatic, visible, and concentrated in the date and motto, the 1971 double die presents its evidence in a more refined, almost architectural way. The doubling on the strongest known 1971 double die obverse specimens shows clear separation in the lettering of Liberty and in the date, but what makes this variety particularly compelling to advanced collectors is the way the doubling interacts with Lincoln's portrait itself. Under magnification, the lines of Lincoln's coat, the curve of his jaw, the definition of his ear, these elements carry the subtle but unmistakable signature of a die that was hubbed with a slight rotational misalignment. It is like looking at a slightly out-of-register photograph, except frozen permanently in metal. Here is something that separates serious numismatists from casual collectors, and it is a concept worth understanding deeply. In the world of Lincoln cent varieties, the double die coins are cataloged and cross-referenced with extraordinary precision. Researchers like Walter Breen, who spent decades documenting Lincoln cent varieties, and the teams behind the Cherry Picker's Guide to Rare Die Varieties, the essential reference text for variety collectors, have assigned specific designations to each confirmed double die. These designations are alphanumeric codes that tell an expert collector exactly which die was used, how significant the doubling is, and how rare the variety is within the broader population of that year's coinage. The top-tier 1971 double die Lincoln cent carries a designation that places it among the most significant varieties of the entire Lincoln Memorial cent era. And the population of confirmed, authenticated examples in high grades is, like the 1969 D, heartbreakingly small. We are, again, talking about a coin where the known survivors in gem condition can be counted without needing more than 2 hands. But let us step away from the technical for a moment and talk about something that does not get discussed enough in coin collecting circles: the role of the ordinary person in the discovery of these varieties. The 1971 double die was not discovered by a team of government metallurgists or professional numismatists working in a laboratory. It was discovered the way most great coin varieties are discovered, by a collector sitting at a table under a lamp with a loupe pressed to their eye, turning coins one by one and looking, always looking, for something that did not quite match the expected pattern. This is one of the most democratizing aspects of numismatics. The great discoveries in coin collecting have not always come from institutions. They have come from patients, from persistent amateurs, from people who believed that if they looked carefully enough at enough coins, they would eventually find something the rest of the world had missed. The 1971 double die Lincoln cent was exactly that kind of discovery, the reward for obsessive attention, for the willingness to examine thousands of coins in search of the one that was different. There is also a fascinating conversation to be had about the color designation of copper coins, and the 1971 Lincoln cent sits right in the middle of it. The Professional Coin Grading Service and similar organizations grade copper coins not only on their numerical scale of 1 to 70, but also on a color designation that significantly affects value. A copper coin can be designated red, red-brown, or brown. A red designation means the coin retains at least 60% of its original mint luster, that bright, almost orange copper glow of freshly struck metal. A brown designation means the coin has toned fully to the darker patina that copper develops over time through oxidation. Red-brown falls in between. The difference in value between a brown specimen and a red specimen of the same coin in the same numerical grade can be enormous, sometimes an order of magnitude. A 1971 double-die Lincoln cent in a high numerical grade with a full red designation is a coin of exceptional rarity, because copper's natural tendency to tone means that most coins, even those preserved in folders or albums, have shifted away from full red by the time they reach collectors today. Finding a 1971 double die in full red, gem condition, is not simply finding a rare coin. It is finding a rare coin that has also beaten the chemistry of 50 years without compromise. And this matters for another reason that connects directly to the emotional world of the collector audience that follows this channel. Many of you who are watching today grew up in households where coins were kept in ways that were loving but not technically optimal. Coins stored in old cardboard albums with PVC-containing plastic. Coins kept in glass jars. Coins wrapped in tissue paper and tucked into shoeboxes. The passage of time was not kind to those coins in terms of preservation, which means the coins that emerge today in genuinely pristine condition, whether through exceptional original storage or simple miraculous luck, carry a premium that reflects the scarcity of that survival. The 1971 Lincoln cent asks you to think about what was in your home that year. Whether you were alive in 1971, whether you were a child, a teenager, a young adult, or not yet born, somewhere in the American economy, coins were passing through hands that did not know what they held. Most of those coins are gone now, worn smooth by decades of commerce, melted down, lost. But a handful survived. And one of those survivors, authenticated and certified at the peak of the grading scale, carrying the double die variety designation that every serious Lincoln cent collector recognizes on sight, has sold at auction for $118,000 for a coin whose legal tender value is 1 single cent. A coin born in the year the gold standard died. A coin struck from copper in a world that was beginning to question whether metal itself had any meaning in modern money. The 1971 Lincoln cent is, in many ways, the most philosophical coin in today's lineup, a small copper circle that asks large questions about value, about faith, and about what we choose to preserve. 3 chapters deep, and every single coin we have examined has carried its own distinct personality, its own fingerprint of history, its own reason for being worth more than most people earn in a year. But Chapter 4 is going to shift the energy of this video in a direction that even longtime collectors sometimes overlook. Because the 1973 Lincoln cent does not lead with a Secret Service investigation. It does not lead with a collapsed gold standard or a nation walking on the moon. It leads with something more personal, more tactile, and in many ways more universally human than any of those grand historical backdrops. It leads with the story of what happens when an entire generation of Americans simultaneously falls in love with coin collecting, and what that collective passion does to the market, the mythology, and ultimately the value of a single copper cent struck in one of the most underestimated years in numismatic history. The early 1970s were, without exaggeration, the golden age of American coin collecting as a popular hobby, not as an elite pursuit, not as the exclusive domain of wealthy antiquarians with velvet-lined display cases and magnifying glasses on silver chains. As a genuinely mass-market kitchen table, every household hobby that swept through the American middle class with a force that the coin industry had never seen before and has never quite replicated since. Coin folders, those flat cardboard albums with punched holes for each date and mint mark of a given series, were sold at drugstores, at five-and-dime shops, at hardware stores. Children collected them. Parents collected them. Grandparents pulled coins from jars they had been saving for decades and started organizing them with a new sense of purpose. The Lincoln cent was the gateway drug of this collecting boom. It was affordable. It was accessible. Every single denomination you spent in daily commerce had a chance of containing a Lincoln cent worth pulling out of circulation. The series ran back to 1909, meaning a complete collection represented 60-plus years of American history that a determined collector could actually assemble, coin by coin, largely from pocket change. You did not need to be rich to collect Lincoln cents. You needed to be patient, observant, and willing to check every penny that passed through your hands. In 1973, that culture was at its peak. The United States Mint was acutely aware of the collecting community, aware of it in ways that influenced production decisions, packaging choices, and the design conversations happening internally about the future of American coinage. Mint sets, those official annual packages of uncirculated coins sold directly to collectors, were selling in record numbers. Proof sets, struck at the San Francisco Mint with specially polished dies and hand-selected planchets to produce coins of mirror-like beauty, were in enormous demand. The hobby was not a subculture in 1973. It was mainstream. It was respectable. It was, for millions of Americans, a meaningful way to connect with history, with family, and with the tangible, holdable reality of the nation's past. The 1973 Lincoln cent was born into this environment of intense public scrutiny. With millions of collectors actively examining coins, the chances of an unusual variety escaping notice were actually lower than in previous decades. And yet, the varieties that did escape, the ones that slipped past millions of careful eyes and survived in collector hands without being immediately identified, carry an extra layer of improbability that amplifies their significance enormously. Now let us talk about something that is absolutely central to the 1973 Lincoln cent's place in the collector hierarchy, and it requires us to discuss the concept of die marriages and working die quality in a way that illuminates why some years produce more significant varieties than others. By 1973, the Lincoln cent dies were being produced at a rate and volume that pushed the boundaries of consistent quality control. The demand for coins was enormous, the American economy was growing, inflation was beginning its long climb that would define the decade, and the velocity of money through the system meant that coins were being produced and consumed at a pace that kept every mint facility running at capacity. Under those conditions, die quality becomes variable. Some working dies are pulled from service early, when they begin to show wear, and replaced. Others are pushed further, used beyond their optimal lifespan, producing coins that carry the subtle signatures of an aging die, slightly softened details, minor die cracks beginning to propagate across the surface, flow lines in the fields that reflect the mechanical stress of millions of strikes. And occasionally, in that high-volume, high-pressure environment, a die with an error makes it into production and strikes a significant number of coins before the error is caught and the die is pulled. The 1973 Lincoln cent that commands serious collector attention is a coin whose variety places it in the crosshairs of everything that makes Lincoln cent collecting endlessly compelling. It is a coin where the combination of strike quality, die characteristics, preservation level, and population rarity creates a perfect storm of collectability. Advanced collectors who specialize in the Lincoln Memorial Cent series, and there are many because this series from 1959 onward is deep, complex, and full of varieties that reward sustained attention, regard the top-tier 1973 Lincoln cent as one of the genuinely underappreciated treasures of the entire run. Here is something that the broader collecting community often misses about coins from the early 1970s, and it connects directly to the cultural moment we described at the opening of this chapter. When millions of people are actively collecting a coin series, the coins that were saved by ordinary families in ordinary ways, tucked into Whitman folders, stored in original mint packaging, kept in desk drawers because someone thought they looked nice, those coins become part of a vast, untracked population of potentially significant pieces. Most of them are common. Most of them grade in the mid-range and carry modest values. But occasionally, within that enormous informal population of saved coins, a truly exceptional specimen emerges. A coin that was set aside in 1973 by someone who simply liked the way it looked, stored in a safe place, and rediscovered decades later in a condition that reflects almost no passage of time at all. These are the coins that show up at estate sales. These are the coins that come out of grandmother's jewelry box, wrapped in a square of tissue paper, bearing no label, no documentation, no story, just the coin itself, gleaming with a luster that stops an experienced collector cold. The 1973 Lincoln cent has a population of such survivors that is small enough to matter and large enough to occasionally surprise the market with an appearance that nobody was expecting. Let us also talk about the geographic dimension of this coin story, because 1973 was a year of significant mint production decisions. The Philadelphia Mint, striking Lincoln cents without a mint mark as was still its practice at the time, produced a substantial run that year. The Denver Mint, with its D-Mint mark, also produced heavily. But the differential between the quality of coins coming from these two facilities, not in terms of design, which was identical, but in terms of die quality, strike sharpness, and the specific characteristics that graders evaluate, is something that variety specialists have documented carefully. The coins that rise to the top of the grading population reports for 1973 come from specific die pairings that produced, for whatever combination of reasons, a superior product. Finding one of those coins, attributing it correctly, and having it certified at the top of the scale is an achievement that the numismatic community recognizes and rewards financially. There is also something deeply worth saying about the role that patience plays in the story of every coin in today's video, but particularly the 1973 Lincoln cent. The collectors who first set these coins aside did not know they were making an investment. They were not thinking in terms of auction houses and population reports and certification labels. They were thinking in terms of a hobby they loved, a historical artifact they wanted to preserve, and the simple human pleasure of holding something well-made and beautiful in their hands. The financial reward came later, sometimes much later. Sometimes after the original collector was gone and their heirs found the collection without fully understanding what they held. If you are watching this video and you have a coin collection that was assembled in the early 1970s, whether by you or by someone you loved, that collection deserves a fresh look. It deserves the attention of someone who understands variety attribution, who knows what to look for in the date digits and the lettering and the surface quality of a coin. Because somewhere in those old folders and blue envelopes and cardboard boxes, there may be something extraordinary waiting to be recognized. The 1973 Lincoln cent, at its highest grade, with the right variety attribution and the certification that transforms a coin from an interesting artifact into a market-ready treasure, has sold for $82,000. $82,000 for a coin that was struck when coin collecting was as American as baseball and apple pie, when millions of people were paying attention and the rare survivors still found ways to hide in plain sight, waiting patiently for the collector who would finally see them for what they truly were. We have arrived at the final chapter of today's video, and everything we have built across the previous 4 coins, the pristine preservation of the 1977, the Secret Service drama of the 1969D, the philosophical weight of the 1971, the Golden Age nostalgia of the 1973, all of it has been leading here. Because the 1964D Lincoln cent is not just the most valuable coin in today's lineup. It is, in the eyes of many serious numismatists, one of the most consequential small denomination coins in the entire history of the United States Mint. And when you understand why, when you understand the full weight of what happened in 1964, what was at stake, what decisions were made, and what survived against every odd imaginable, the price of $140,000 will not feel like a surprise. It will feel almost inevitable. To understand the 1964D Lincoln cent, you must first understand the year 1964 in its full, raw, historical complexity. America in 1964 was a nation suspended between grief and determination. President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas just 14 months earlier, and the wound was still open, still bleeding into every corner of American public life. Lyndon Johnson was in the White House, pushing forward the Great Society agenda, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed into law that summer, a seismic legislative achievement that transformed the legal relationship between the American government and its citizens. The Beatles had just arrived on American shores, igniting a cultural revolution that would reshape music, fashion, and generational identity for decades to come. And in the background of all of this history, in the functional, unglamorous machinery of everyday commerce, the United States Mint was navigating one of the most severe coin shortages in modern American history. The coin shortage of the early 1960s is a chapter of numismatic history that deserves far more mainstream attention than it receives. Beginning around 1959 and accelerating sharply through 1963 and 1964, the United States experienced a genuine, economy-disrupting shortage of circulating coins. Vending machines sat idle. Parking meters went unfed. Businesses struggled to make change. The causes were multiple and interlocking: a growing population, an expanding economy, the rise of vending machine commerce, and critically, the accelerating habit of coin hoarding driven by the very collecting boom we discussed in Chapter 4. Millions of Americans were pulling coins out of circulation and putting them into folders and jars and coffee cans, and the Mint simply could not produce coins fast enough to compensate. Congress responded with urgency bordering on panic. Legislation was passed directing the mint to produce coins in unprecedented volumes. The date on coins was frozen, meaning that 1964 dated coins continued to be struck well into 1965, because changing the die's mint production would have slowed output at precisely the moment maximum output was most critical. Both the Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were ordered to run at full capacity around the clock for as long as necessary to flood the economy with coinage and break the shortage. The result was a production run of Lincoln cents in 1964 that was, at the time, the largest in the history of the series. The Denver Mint alone struck over 3 billion Lincoln cents dated 1964. 3 billion coins from a single facility in a single year. The number is staggering. And yet, within that ocean of copper, the coin we are discussing today stands completely alone. Because the 1964 D Lincoln cent that commands $140,000 is not a product of that frantic, high-volume emergency production. It is something far rarer, far more technically significant, and far more historically charged than anything the regular production lines could have accidentally produced. The 1964 D Lincoln cent at the summit of the collector market is a SMS coin, a special mint set specimen. Now, this designation requires careful explanation, because the special mint set program of the mid-1960s is itself a fascinating and somewhat obscure chapter in United States mint history. In 1964, in response to the coin shortage and the public outcry from collectors who were frustrated by the freezing of dates and the disruption to normal mint set production, the mint began experimenting with a new category of collector coin that sat between the standard uncirculated finish of mint set coins and the full mirror-like proof finish of traditional proof coins. These special mint set coins were struck on specially prepared planchets, with dies that had been given more attention than standard circulation dies, producing a coin with a satin-like, almost frosted surface quality that was distinct from anything the mint had officially produced before. The 1964 SMS Lincoln cent is a coin whose very existence was, for years, a subject of debate within the numismatic community. For a long time, the United States Mint officially denied producing any special mint set coins in 1964. The standard position was that no SMS coins existed from that year. And then the coins themselves began appearing, authenticated, certified, undeniable in their characteristics, impossible to explain as anything other than what they clearly were. The discovery and authentication of genuine 1964 SMS Lincoln cents was one of the most significant numismatic controversies of the late 20th century, and it fundamentally altered the way collectors and researchers think about what the mint produced during the crisis years of the early 1960s. Here is what makes the surface of a genuine 1964 SMS Lincoln cent so unmistakable to an experienced eye. The fields, the flat background areas of the coin, carry a brilliant, almost glass-like quality that standard circulation strikes simply do not possess. But unlike a proof coin, which has a pure mirror finish with sharp cameo contrast between the fields and the raised design elements, the SMS finish has a more complex, layered quality. The design elements themselves, Lincoln's portrait, the lettering, the date, carry a satiny, almost matte texture that catches light differently at different angles, producing a visual effect that experienced graders describe as uniquely compelling and immediately distinctive. It is a finish that cannot be faked convincingly, cannot be produced by cleaning or polishing an ordinary coin, and cannot be mistaken for anything other than what it is by someone who has studied the series carefully. The population of confirmed, certified 1964 DSMS Lincoln cents is, predictably for a coin of this nature, extraordinarily small. We are talking about a coin whose official existence was denied for years, whose production circumstances remain incompletely documented, and whose surviving examples represent a population so thin that every authenticated specimen is significant news in the numismatic community. These are not coins that turn up regularly at coin shows or in estate sales. They are coins that appear rarely, travel through the hands of serious specialist collectors, and command immediate, intense attention whenever they surface in the auction market. There is also a deeply poignant human dimension to the 1964 D Lincoln cent that connects it to the broader emotional landscape of this video. Kennedy's face was placed on the half-dollar in 1964 as a tribute to the assassinated president, and the public response to that coin was overwhelming. People hoarded Kennedy half-dollars by the millions, pulled them from circulation immediately, refused to spend them. The emotional weight of 1964 coinage is unlike that of almost any other year. The coins struck in that year exist against a backdrop of national mourning, of a country trying to honor its grief by holding on to things, by preserving what felt important, by refusing to let the ordinary objects of daily life simply disappear into the commerce they were designed for. The Lincoln cent of 1964 carries that weight too, even if it carries it more quietly than the Kennedy half-dollar. Lincoln and Kennedy were linked in the American imagination in 1964 in ways that went beyond the coincidences that conspiracy theorists have cataloged obsessively. They were linked by the nature of their deaths, by the shock of public assassination, by the sense that something irreplaceable had been taken from the national story. Holding a 1964 Lincoln cent is, for many collectors of a certain age, holding a piece of that grief, a small copper talisman from the year America tried to find its footing again. And for the collector who holds the right 1964 Lincoln cent, the SMS specimen, certified and authenticated, graded at the pinnacle of the scale, carrying that unmistakable satin surface that the mint spent years pretending it had never produced, the value of that grief, that history, that technical rarity, and that human story is quantified in the auction market with extraordinary clarity. $140,000. The highest value of any coin in today's video. The highest because it is the rarest. The highest because its very existence was once officially denied. The highest because it combines technical distinction, historical drama, production mystery, and the emotional resonance of one of the most consequential years in 20th century American history into a single small coin that fits, impossibly, in the center of your palm. That is the 1964 Lincoln cent. That is why 5 pennies, 5 coins whose combined face value is 5 cents, represent more than $500,000 in collector value. And that is why, every time you reach into your pocket or your change jar or your grandmother's old coin collection, you should look a little more carefully. Because history has a way of hiding in the most ordinary places, waiting patiently for the person who knows how to see it. Thank you for watching Expensive Coins History Channel. If you found one of these coins in your collection, or if this video changed the way you think about the coins in your life, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below, and share this video with someone who needs to check their coin jar today. We will see you in the next one.